Hello there, friends. I'm Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, and I am joined today by...
Scott Hummel, the president of Tusculum University.
And we're going to have a Coffee Convo. Coffee Convos is an opportunity to get to meet some folks and hear about the work of God in the lives of our friends. So, Dr. Hummel, apparently you're our friend.
Well, thank you.
You qualify.
I'm glad I know I've got a few.
Yes. You probably need friends in your position. So you have been at Tusculum since the beginning of 2020.
That's right. So arrived February of 2020.
Okay.
An easy way to remember is that I arrived 1 month before COVID did.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. Right before COVID.
Yes.
Welcome to being president of Tusculum University.
That's right.
Yeah.
And welcome to Greenville as we shut everything down and you don't get to meet anybody.
Yes, that's right. Yes, we'll get to those challenges, I'm sure, in the course of our conversation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, your bio, your family, your wife, your kids, whatever feels appropriate.
Sure. So a little bit about me and that I think has been formative for who I am.
Yeah.
Part of that is a military brat. So grew up on Air Force bases all around the country.
Yeah.
So Tennessee is my 9th state to live in. And so that I think has formed me. I like meeting people.
Yeah.
I like seeing new things. And
Yeah.
so that's a part of who I am. I think it's also given me a little bit of a broader view of the country and
Yes.
different people, and even lived overseas, and so that's kind of a part of who I am. Kind of growing up.
Yeah.
In contrast to my wife, who grew up in Concord, North Carolina, and still knows people she went to kindergarten with. So contrast there.
Yes, my growing up years is much more like yours,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife's is like your wife's.
Yeah.
Yeah. More like I've lived in the same house and had the same room my whole life and know those people across the street, and that sense of rootedness. I feel like I didn't have as much a rootedness in sense of place, and my family was that for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So as a result, the simple question of where are you from?
Yes. It's...
Usually leads to a much longer answer than they ever wanted.
Yeah, I understand.
So where am I from?
Yeah.
Depends upon how you
want
want.
everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've always felt similarly, like when I'm asked that question, I say, well, I spent the most time in Cincinnati, and that's where I graduated from high school, and the first place where I had a sense of like geographical roots, where I knew other people in that community. But I quickly moved away, and so I'm not sure that really is.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in a similar way, so a lot of family in California, of course, they think I sound very Southern. Folks in the South think I don't.
Think you don't. No.
And then in a similar way, I graduated from high school in Florida.
Okay.
So in a similar dynamic, but if I go back to Florida, nobody there would think I'm from there.
Yeah.
So that was certainly, I think, has formed who I am.
Sure. Yeah.
Another thing that has formed who I am is I was first-generation college student.
Ah.
So my dad was in the military, but enlisted, and
Yeah.
nobody in my family, cousins, grandparents, nobody had been to college.
Wow.
And so being able to go to college, that was just kind of opened kind of the world to me. Loved college, loved academics. Now, kind of related that my grandfather had not gotten out of the 8th grade, and so he wanted me to be able to go to college. He wanted to help support. Problem is that he was very opposed to Christianity and religion in general. So he said that he would help support me go to college as long as I didn't study any of that blankety-blank religion. And I majored in biblical studies.
Nice. Yes. And here you are. Yeah.
Yeah. But what also that meant is that I had to get a lot of scholarships, had to work a lot, and I think that actually also was formative for my college experience and made me, I think, value it that much more.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think kind of led to me being into biblical studies is because while my folks didn't go to church that much, I went on a mission trip when I was 13.
Cool.
I'd like to say to share Christ.
Right.
But I actually went on that mission trip because Lisa Wilkerson was going on that mission trip.
Lisa.
I don't think she knew I existed,
Yes.
but I knew she existed.
Yes.
And it was to Portland, Oregon, and I'd never been to Portland, Oregon, and so it was adventure. And
Yes.
so I went really for all the wrong reasons. Okay. But it was there that the Minister of Youth, kind of asked us to kind of go into the community and share our faith. And it was there that I realized I knew the answers, what I was supposed to say.
Right,
so,
right.
How are you saved? Well, I could give you the answer.
Sure.
But it was also when I realized I hadn't asked Jesus into my heart. I hadn't repented of my sins. I hadn't done this.
Right.
And so
I've been on that trip before myself, as the person who's the participant who's sitting there going, I think this is the answer. I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to say this.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've experienced that as much as I'm talking about.
And then Brother Sammy said, all right, now that you're a Christian, you need to start reading the Bible every day.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I did not know that came with it, but okay.
Right.
And so started reading the Bible every day, and it was just like, these are amazing stories and fascinating lessons, just really loved it. And that led to me majoring in biblical studies and really kind of exploring what my calling would be, what did God want me to do and to be. And so when I went to college, I was kind of thinking one of three things. I thought maybe I'll be a pastor.
Okay.
Because I enjoyed church and working in the church, enjoyed the Bible, but I also enjoyed college and academics, and so maybe could I be a professor?
Yeah.
But I also was thought about being a social worker.
Okay.
Because I wanted to make a difference in the lives of individuals and people. And the thing is, God kind of pulled all three of those together.
Okay.
And I got to be a professor of Old Testament, be interim pastor of a lot of churches, and so kind of pulled the academics. And so some of my teaching was preaching, some of my preaching is teaching.
Yeah, right.
And anytime you're working with students, it's a little bit like social work.
It's a little bit like social work, yes. Yeah. No question.
Yeah. So it kind of really pulled all of those together for me.
Cool.
And then I guess another formative experience is that after I graduated college, I went to seminary for a year. Met Star, who's now my wife, and a phenomenal woman. And so we've been married almost 32 years now. Yeah. But after a year there, I got a scholarship, full scholarship to go to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, work on my master's degree. Cool. And I mean, that was incredibly informative and formative, and just loved that. And I think helped me to be a better Old Testament professor when I later became one when I graduated from Southwestern. Yeah. And then being a professor, I mean, I couldn't imagine a better job. One, it was right in my calling. Just get to be with students, and then I got to take groups of students to the Middle East 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Greece. Yeah. Just
super cool.
Oh my goodness, what a great job with students and helping them explore the world, and so love that. Yeah. And then I was asked by my alma mater to go back to William Carey. Okay. After teaching 10 years at LeTourneau University. And I became a vice president for church relations and advancement, helped raise money for the school. They were starting a medical school and physical therapy school, so they needed to raise some money for that. And then later became executive vice president and provost for several years.
What's a provost for those who may not be totally...
So great question. Yeah. Probably you could put the sign on your door could be complaint department. Okay. So
from the staff and faculty who are teaching?
Yes, students, parents, alumni.
Yes.
So
gotcha.
So basically you have the president, and then the provost is the administrative position just under the president. Yeah. So love that, but then 1 month before COVID, was asked or came to be president here at Tusculum University. So that's a little bit of my journey from first generation college student to president.
It's interesting to hear how your own experience, first generation college student, needing to work, needing to get scholarships, clearly informs your role today.
Yes.
Because you've lived that. How do you think that's helped you as a president today with students and understanding the system and how much work it takes? And
So I think very much so. I think it's very much helped me be a better president. So being a first generation student makes me very attuned to really, the needs of our students, but particularly our first generation students. 39% of our students at Tusculum are first generation students.
Wow.
So, they're trying to navigate the process.
Sure,
the parents are navigating the process. It's easier to give up for a first generation student because
but there aren't those who have gone before who are saying you're going to need to do
That's
this.
right.
Make sure you visit this office, etc.
That's right.
I remember feeling a little bit, even though my parents both are very educated, higher education. I remember even for me walking around thinking, oh, I guess I have to. Wait, what office do I go to and who do I talk to? And so I would say, hey, Mom or Dad, and they would say, well, probably this, probably that.
Mm-hmm.
So even I had to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
And felt a little like on my own, despite the fact that I actually had resources available via phone.
Right.
Yeah. So I can imagine for someone who is the first generation student, it's actually a lot to take in and to figure out.
It is, and when you're having to do that on your own, the other thing that's a big factor, and particularly when I compare that between my experience and my daughter's experience. I have three daughters, all graduated college. So for my daughters, it was never a question of if you're going to college. It's where you're going to go to college.
Where?
Okay.
Yeah, right.
The other is, when I would face obstacles as a first generation student, for me it would be, all right, is this a sign that this isn't for me? Does this mean I'm not cut out for college? Does this mean
like a nagging?
That's right. That's right. Whereas if my daughter's called with the same questions, hey, look,
yeah,
I face the same thing.
Yeah.
You're going to face this and more. What this means is you need to toughen up, or this means you need to go talk to somebody, or you need to go get help for this, or you need to go do this resource. And so it becomes a very different conversation of persistence that first generation student doesn't always have.
Yeah.
So that makes me very attuned to the needs of the students. It also makes me attuned to the needs of kind of the lower income students. I was a Pell student and had to work a lot. And then, when I worked on campus, and I worked off campus, but I was maintenance, and I cleaned the bathrooms, and I mowed the lawns, and so I saw every aspect of the university.
Yes.
And then so working maintenance to being a professor to being on staff, to being a fundraiser, to supervising admissions, to when I got to Tusculum, I had experienced just about everything.
Yeah.
Although I discovered that there was something I had not experienced before. And that was when I got a call that we have a black bear on campus.
Oh, yes.
And students are taking selfies with it.
Yes.
And I thought, I've been prepared for a lot, but
not that.
But not that.
Yeah.
So
the black bear was making its rounds all over this part of Greenville for the better part of almost a year, apparently.
Right.
We have folks from our congregation who I've seen pictures. They haven't been taking selfies with it.
Okay.
But they've got pictures of it rifling through their trash and things like that.
Yes. So I'm prepared for a lot, but not for bears on campus.
Yeah, indeed. Good stuff. So tell us a little bit about the process of becoming a president and coming to Tusculum and what it's been like for the first few years, perhaps especially through COVID. What have been some unique challenges to being president that might be a little different than what you've experienced before in administration, as a professor, as a groundskeeper, etc. What are some of the unique challenges to being a college university president in the first few years of being one, through COVID, in today's increasingly difficult higher education world?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, some things that would be an adjustment going from a position in administration or professor to president.
Yeah.
Or as provost, you're the second at the
Yes.
university. There's a big difference between making recommendations to the president. This is what I recommend. This is what I think. This is my best, input. And then having to make the decision.
Right.
There's a big difference between Moses and Joshua.
Yes.
And Joshua had a lot of experience. Joshua had been on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Joshua had served in the tent meeting. Joshua had been made an administrative guy. Joshua had been in the promised land already. And when Joshua had to go from number 2 to number 1, he was terrified.
Yes.
And had to be encouraged 4 times in 1 chapter.
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's just a natural transition.
Right.
That, now it's my decision, my responsibility, and there's a weight.
There's a weight, yes.
To that.
Yeah.
Then, doing that in the midst of COVID, because I think
Welcome to university presidency.
Right. And so trying to now even fundraise in an environment in which people are afraid that, because there were times that we thought unemployment might go to 30%.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to take care of students, you're trying to take care of faculty, you're trying to talk to a community to help provide resources for students who've now had to go home, and some don't have computers, some don't have. I mean, you would think all.
I remember some of that. Yeah.
You would think all college students would have all these resources to be able to just shift to online.
Right. Right.
And you really don't. And so trying to do that in an environment where I'd had 1 month to meet people, so that made it a challenge.
Yeah.
The other is, you have all these unknowns. So 2.5 years of a pandemic.
Yeah.
We now know some things. Well, we didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
We could have done this differently,
Right.
or CDC was recommending this at this time, but they're now recommending this.
Yeah.
And so you're really trying to make decisions with information at that time.
That seem to be constantly shifting.
That constantly shifting,
yeah.
and you're trying to take care of people. Some, on one side, anything that you do is ridiculous, and why are you doing that?
Right.
And on others, well, you're not in a hazmat suit, and you don't have my child in a hazmat suit.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's right.
While online.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're trying to.
It's a can't win.
That's right. And then the other, and this was where part of my background informed some of the decisions.
Yeah.
Okay. So I knew that we had health risks.
Sure.
But we also have academic risks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you've got first generation lower income students and they've just shifted to online, we've just elevated the academic risks. They're now less likely to graduate. They're less likely to, so how do we balance in a way that doesn't make everybody happy?
Right. Because the trade-off is going to mean some cons no matter what you do.
Correct.
And so it's figuring out those risks. And
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, and then also a little bit as a president, you have to try to see the bigger picture. And so you have this is affecting my class.
Sure.
Yes, it affects your class, but it also affects this team, and it also affects this residential hall.
Yes.
It also affects, and so you're trying to make.
At this larger level.
That's
because
right.
it's all integrated and everything affects everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
And people, and I certainly, when I was a professor, I saw things from that perspective.
Sure.
And I could have a tendency to think that was the whole perspective.
Sure.
Because that was my perspective.
Sure.
And it's not always. And of course, anyway, so that's a challenge. But also a little bit of what informed is having been at a university that came through a devastating tornado.
Yeah.
And having to tell students then and at Tusculum, at William Carey, look, I hope we never have to go through another tornado again.
Yeah, and the tornado, dozens of buildings.
That's right.
I mean, it was a big deal.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
50 buildings on campus, 49 out of 50. 49 out of 50 damaged or destroyed.
Wow.
Just unbelievable.
Right. Okay.
And I'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. But I ended up having kind of the same message to both. In that, hope never have to do a tornado again. Hope never have to do a pandemic again.
Right.
But whether you want to or not, this will not be your last crisis.
That's right.
This will not be your last tragedy.
Crises aren't new.
That's right. Now
We're in one now.
The next one might be financial. The next one might be relational. The
Sure.
next one might be health.
Yes.
But you are going to face a crisis. So a part of this experience is to learn from this experience. How can you be better prepared for the next experience?
Right.
And so that also...
This is an educational opportunity, really. No, I'm just kidding. Not that you probably phrased it that way, but
well,
it is.
To a certain degree, it's...
and every opportunity can be and should be.
Right. That's right. Because you were going to face
Yeah.
another crisis.
That's right. Yeah.
And then the other is, after a tornado, it can become easy to say, well, I can't do this because. And a lot of that's legitimate.
Yeah.
In a pandemic, I can't do this because.
Right.
I can't do this because. And so, so it becomes easier to disengage and easier to make an excuse. And even if you know it's not a legit excuse, you got an excuse.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like after the tornado, I was teaching Greco-Roman world when the tornado hit.
Okay.
And I emailed my class the day after the tornado on a Sunday. The tornado hit Saturday, emailed the class on Sunday. And I said, the building that our classroom was in no longer exists.
Yeah.
Our classroom no longer exists, but the syllabus is online.
We'll be meeting at the Areopagus.
Yeah. Just put the reading online.
Yeah.
Quiz is tomorrow.
Wait, what? We just had a tornado. We still have this test? Or
That's
quiz?
right. And so,
Right.
in some ways, some people hear that like, oh my goodness, that's harsh.
Right.
And sensitive.
Right.
But I actually had more than half the class email me individually and say, thank you. I didn't know if we would finish the semester. I didn't know if we would finish at all. Would I be able to graduate?
Right.
And when you said we had a quiz tomorrow, I knew we're going to finish this.
And I knew as a student, yes, this is a problem. This is a crisis. We're going to have to deal with it corporately, and obviously that's going to affect me individually. But in the middle of that, some of the regularity and normalcy of the good, healthy, fruitful patterns of life are it's not a good time to abandon a lot of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so, was it a legit excuse that we weren't going to have class in the classroom? Yes. But could we find ways to still have class?
Yeah.
And in a similar way, right after, we kind of shut things down and shifted on like everybody did.
Right.
There was actually a lot of pressure on a lot of schools that shifted to pass-fail. And I don't want to criticize any of the schools for making that decision to go to pass-fail.
Oh, but this definitely is in that whole world of things you have to decide about, trade-offs.
But I insisted, no, we're going to stay with our grades.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. One, for the students. We need to keep that level of accountability high.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to drive across future bridges built by engineers who passed. I don't want to go into surgery by a medical doctor who passed.
Right.
Okay? I want somebody who maintained.
Yeah.
The other thing is I don't want our professors teaching just so that students pass.
Right. This is not just about the students. This is about the whole integrated system.
That's right. Now, we may need to find ways to adjust. We may need to help them get access. We may need to provide some additional training online. We may need to do some things for our professors. So there may be a whole host of things we have to do differently. And let's not be locked into the way we do it, but let's, in fact, in some sense, it helps us to refocus on what really are we doing?
Yes.
What really are we providing? And how do we provide an opportunity and experience of worship?
Right.
Well, maybe it's done differently. And churches had to deal with the same types of things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's good. Very interesting. I'm sure that was a fun and formative and frustrating time.
Okay. Well, I agree with the second two.
Not the
formative, frustrating, but not fun.
I was trying to be as sarcastic as possible with the fun one.
Yeah.
So we have a number of people who have turned in some questions. So let's run through some of these.
Sure.
Some of them overlap. Favorite section of the Old Testament and why? OT is your thing.
Yeah.
Your specialty.
So love the Old Testament. So on one hand, I'm particularly partial to history and historical books. Love that. My dissertation actually dealt with the intertestamental period.
Okay, yeah.
So I love history. But when I first became an Old Testament professor, my first semester, I had to teach Old Testament poetical books. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of thought, poetry,
this
music,
frou-frou abstract idea, and Hebrew
poetry. Yeah,
Hebrew poetry is
that actually
not
became probably my favorite class to teach.
Cool. Yeah.
And part of the reason why is I love in the Psalms the brutal honesty.
Oh yeah.
So, of course, the largest number of psalms are praises,
Mm-hmm.
hymns of praise, songs of thanksgiving, if you kind of group those together.
Yeah, right.
But the second largest category are laments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, laments in a worship service. Lament is a part of worship.
Mm-hmm.
And when I contrast that to most of our worship experiences.
Oh, yes. Do you think? We're very happy clappy nowadays.
Yeah, but maybe not as real and honest.
There's little confession.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of woe is me going on. There's not a whole lot of I long for a different world where sin's effects are not as I see them in the world and in other people's lives and my own. Yeah, there's not a lot of that going on in worship services today.
But they were in the Old Testament.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you have these imprecatory psalms
Mm-hmm.
that in some sense make us uncomfortable because they're these angry cursing psalms.
Yes.
Okay. And yet, they're incredibly transformative because there's this brutal honesty of, God, I am angry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can almost feel the anger
Oh, yeah.
that the psalmist is writing that's in Scripture. But it's expressing this anger to God,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is important. So instead of just expressing it, but taking that anger to God.
Yeah, it's not horizontal typically.
That's right.
It's using some horizontal things in an illustrative kind of way.
Right.
It's part of the filter of going
right.
to God. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that anger is more likely to be, and there's even elements of hatred in some of those imprecatory psalms.
Uh-huh.
I hate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But that brutal honesty of taking that anger and even that hatred to God is more likely to transform that hatred into love.
Mm-hmm.
That these are also God's children.
Mm-hmm.
And God loves them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking to God about how much I hate and am angry about them.
Yes.
And it transforms that.
Yep.
But if I keep that anger bottled up, or I keep that anger only directed at them, it's more likely to stay angry
Sure.
and stay hatred. So
Sure.
this brutal honesty has this transformative effect.
Mm.
There's doubt expressed
Mm-hmm.
in the Psalms.
Yes.
You think, well-
Which has to be there in the faith transaction. You've got to doubt because otherwise it can't be faith in that
Right.
sense. Yeah.
Well, and even doubting Thomas, and how can Thomas doubt? But
Who ends up being one of the most incredible missionaries in a
Yes.
whole bunch of ways that aren't talked about
Mhm.
much in the New Testament
That's right.
at all, but that we see in history afterwards.
but even then, of all the disciples, even more than Peter, more than anybody, the most explicit statement of faith when he calls him my God.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
And it's this, I appreciate and understand that, and I think legitimately, I think Thomas was understandable in doubting the resurrection of Jesus.
Mm.
I mean, it just doesn't happen every day.
No.
In fact, the point of resurrection is it's impossible.
That's right.
It's impossible. But God does the impossible.
Yeah.
And I don't fault him for doubting the impossible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he expresses that to Christ, and he then gives the greatest statement of faith because it's transformed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as much as I love history, it actually was the poetical
Hmm.
books that I enjoy the most.
Cool. Good stuff. Yeah. And the Psalms have been throughout all of the history of God's people.
Mhm.
I was going to say Christianity, all the history of God's people. It has been almost more than anything in the Old Testament, the thing that every single day,
Yeah.
Psalms and Proverbs, but every single day, like I remember being told as soon as I started reading the Bible
Mhm.
and being told, this is what the Bible means, this is how to read it and how to interpret it, yada, yada. I remember being told a psalm a day, a psalm a day, a psalm
Mhm.
a day. And I think that's part of that
Mhm.
reason why is because it's expressing a lot
Mhm.
of that relationship with God
Mhm.
in those ways
That's
that that aren't as much expressed in other Old Testament books
Mhm.
often.
And so I don't think it's by coincidence that if there's any book in the Old Testament
Yeah.
that gets combined with the New Testament, the
Right.
New Testament and
New
Psalms.
Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs.
That's right.
All those little tiny.
That's right.
that we.
I have never seen a New Testament in Leviticus.
Nope. Good stuff. So we'll get to higher education and some leadership stuff here soon, but a little bit more here that we have some questions about biblical backgrounds, archaeology, history, which is your particular favorite thing. What is something most people assume about the context of the Bible that is different than they assume?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is I've heard a lot of pastors talk about the eye of the needle. Of course, Jesus talks about the eye of the needle, and
Yes, yes.
there was this gate in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And this gate in Jerusalem that never existed.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, the illustration goes that if a camel could get through the eye of the needle, but you had to take the baggage off, it had to get on its knees, and it had to go through. And I'm not even sure camels would do that, but maybe they would. There was no gate that way, so that was actually not a part of the context, even though I've heard many illustrations trying to give that context.
Yes.
Now, there are a couple of other things that could be a part of the context. There was a reference to, in some gates and guardhouses, a little part where you could put a letter, a message, and that could be the eye of the needle.
Oh, right.
The most likely context for the eye of the needle is actually you find in some rabbinical literature several times, and it's used this way. And so I actually think this is the way that Jesus is using it, the eye of the needle. So you got a needle, and it's the eye of the needle.
Yep.
And the point is not that you can get into heaven if you get on your knees. Right. Or that if you humble yourself and take off the baggage.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I think the point is, and I think the disciples immediately got it based on their question.
Yes.
Is that it is impossible.
Yes.
It's impossible.
Yes.
For the camel to go through the eye of the needle. And so Jesus ends up having to respond because they're like, well, how can this happen?
Right.
And Jesus responds, what is impossible with man is possible with God.
Yeah.
That resurrection is impossible.
Yeah.
But it happened.
Yeah.
God's grace, our ability to be saved, is impossible, but he did it.
Right. That's a good one. I always fear using an illustration of some type nowadays because anybody and everybody at that moment can go, wait a second. Wait, camel, eye of a needle, gate, and so I'm not remotely as illustrative as I used to be for a few other reasons too. But yes, I've heard once the thing about the camel getting down, and in seminary, thinking was this is just a part of my way to get to 2 PhDs and have 3 books printed by the time I'm 30. My thinking during seminary, which is half the seminarians in the world, I remember thinking, oh, that dummy, he doesn't even know that gate didn't even exist. Ho, ho, ho. Yeah. But there's a lot of that's super important to be far more careful about in your preaching and your teaching. I appreciate that one because that's a classic example of the context mattering. Yeah, and the historical context is much more important than most will think of and hear when they're hearing somebody preach or teach. I always try to make sure that I've run it through a few background commentaries or Old Testament, New Testament use of the Old or Old Testament use of the Old, and a few of those before not necessarily before I'm doing some of the exegetical interpretive process, but a part of that as I'm doing the words themselves. I try to make sure, don't forget the history, don't forget the context, because I tend to be a words, abstract ideas guy. And so early on in preaching, I thought, I got to make sure I run into this through Keener or a few other folks like that every time.
And another thing with context, not just the historical, archaeological context, but also the kind of the literary context, because I think we often read the Bible in a very fragmented sort of way.
Oh, yeah.
So, we might read Galatians and read a chapter or 2 chapters of Galatians, and the next day we read a chapter of Galatians, the next day we read a chapter of Galatians. Or even when we do a message, we often kind of understand why we do that.
Yeah.
But I remember when I would, dating my wife so long ago that we didn't have email, and she actually sent me letters.
Ooh.
I would
remember those days.
I would never have read one of her letters a page at a time.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to read the whole letter.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, maybe I'll go back and reread a
Yes.
part. What does she mean by this?
Right.
But you got to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
And and then there's some things that obviously God does an unbelievable job in communicating His Word in translation. That we're reading His Word in English in the West thousands of years later, and yet He still powerfully communicates through the Spirit. So to me, it's phenomenal that He's able to communicate so powerfully through that.
Yeah. I would call it actually divine.
Yeah, I mean, it's all those filters that would make it difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But it also is helpful kind of with the Greek and the Hebrew, because for example, in 1 Samuel, you have a particular Hebrew word, kind of kabod, that one word is stretched into about 5 or 6 English words.
As is typical for Hebrew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's in that section, it's very intentionally drawing a kind of a causal connection. And the way that you see that connection is through that one Hebrew word.
Yes.
And that just gets lost in the English. So if you divide the story up and you fragment the story,
right,
you may miss the whole
apart
point.
from that
That's
word.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's good. Absolutely. Very important.
So which is also, I guess, another lesson thing that I'm still learning is so that so this morning reading in Ezekiel. So I still read the Bible every day, and so I'd like to think that, hey, I've got a PhD. I have been interim pastor of about 15 different churches.
Right.
I am a president of a Christian university.
Yes.
I used to be an Old Testament professor. I've read the book enough.
Yes.
It's just, it's just still amazing this morning, discovering and just the Spirit still. I mean, so there is a humility in reading His Word that I have now.
Yes.
That, shall I say, I did not have during my first Old Testament class. I remember in Dr. Clausen's Introduction to Old Testament class.
Okay.
And by that time, I had read the Bible twice.
Yeah.
Okay, not read any other book twice, but I read the Bible twice.
Wow, that's good.
And I'm 18.
Yeah, for sure.
18, read this book twice.
Yeah.
Okay. And
got it licked.
And thank God I didn't say this out loud, but I actually remember thinking that first day, what is He going to teach me about the Old Testament that I don't already know?
Wow.
And so after all that study and all that experience, I feel like I know this drop in an ocean that I'm still discovering.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So Scripture hasn't changed, but boy, my glimpse or awareness of it has.
Yeah. And what you just said is Scripture itself hasn't changed, but it's continuing to change me.
Right.
And the other day, I was reading something in Job 1:1-5, the very beginning, and I thought, there's Christ's stuff right there that I've never seen. It talks about Him being blameless and then making sacrifice continually for His kids, making offerings over and over in case they might have sinned against God. Because it said He feared God and He avoided evil. I mean, and so I started going through the rest of Job and I thought, there's a little, I mean, not that it's the main thing, but it's one of the cool little themes. I'd never seen it.
Right.
And it's right there. And I thought, how have I not seen this? This is great. Good stuff. Good stuff. We could keep going forever on things like this, but I'm sure some people would like for us to get out of nerdy Bible stuff occasionally here.
I have been called a nerd before, so that's all right.
Yes. So I'm super interested in higher education, how it's changed in your 30 or so years of being involved as a student, as a prof, as a now president. How has higher education changed? What's it like now that it wasn't then? And yeah.
Yeah, so a lot has changed. So, um, in many ways, I think we focused more on access to college appropriately. Now I think we need to focus more on access to graduation, and we always kind of have, but it's not enough for somebody to start college, do a year or two, maybe incur debt, and so I think how can we do a better job of helping them get across the finish line?
Right.
And so that's not necessarily. I do think there's a greater emphasis on completion than there used to be, but
yeah, that makes sense. I remember seeing student success be a department and office that would show up in college campuses and university campuses. I don't know when it was. You would know, but I remember seeing that and thinking, that's new. I've never seen that. But it makes sense.
Yeah. So it's not brand new, but that's certainly when you say 30 years ago, I think that's somewhat of a shift.
Yeah.
The other thing, and this is probably more my perspective, and you might find some other people that would very much disagree with this, but part of this in my experience, in my perceptions, in my understanding, in my interactions, is that there was that seemed like a greater ability or degree for a university to be able to talk about difficult, complex issues and be able to engage in debate and at the end of the day still be friends.
Right. Yes.
It was always a challenge then, because I think, and maybe I know I'm idealistic and a little naive, but I think universities should be the best places in the country to be able to exchange ideas and to be able to disagree and to be able to,
Right.
I think it's just part of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think now many universities, thank goodness not all, but many universities are some of the worst places to be able to...
I do not disagree. Yes.
And there's so much of this, and there's this... I think that there is a different orthodoxy.
Yes.
I think you have a lot of secular institutions, secular universities, that have their own orthodoxy, and you better believe this. No, you need to believe this. No, you need to believe this. No, you
ironically,
need to believe this.
they are the hegemony.
Yes.
If you ask me. Right.
So
not all.
Right. But that's...
Well, I've been thinking about this for years. I went to Wheaton, and it's very intentionally these are the core Christian things. We're not going to vary on these, but we're going to tell you everything.
Yes.
We're going to teach you everything. And so there was a lot of that dialogue in the classroom. Here's how the Christian worldview speaks to this. And so we think that because yada yada. And it wasn't denominationally focused. It was just generic Christian worldview training and thinking in critical kinds of ways. And I appreciate that. Now, of course, I went to school in the early 90s, which is relatively recent in the whole scheme of things.
I think so, but don't ask one of our students.
Right, exactly. Who was born after the 2000s. So I looked around. My dad has always been in Christian higher education. And so it's funny because on the one hand, I've experienced some of his experience, which was somewhat of a narrow, I wouldn't call it fundy because it wasn't really fundamentalistic in that sense, but compared to the larger swath of things, it was kind of narrow. And then I go to Wheaton, which is likewise narrow in that sense, but it was a broad range of everything in the sense of liberal arts education and humanities. And I started to think, about 15-ish years ago or so, because I'm a weirdo who would occasionally read Chronicle of Higher Education, and my dad was always in that world, so I'd be interested in hearing that stuff. I started to think, this is funny. I think the Christian higher education places that are explicitly saying, this is what we believe, but we're sharing with you all these other things, are ironically the best place to actually learn more.
Yes.
In that sense.
Yes.
So I was thinking of that because you were saying the orthodoxy of secular institutions is its own hegemonic, confessional kind of place, in a sense that if you're not there, you don't fit here.
Yeah. And so sometimes I don't think they even realize how parallel they are. They don't call it orthodoxy.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And they don't call it heresy, but they cancel it.
Yes, sure.
Well, so there's a lot of parallels to it. So
Yeah.
I think, in fact, so I meet with every new full-time person at Tusculum, and we
Uh-huh.
talk about the mission. We
Mm-hmm.
go through the mission statement, and part of that is a caring Christian environment.
Right.
And a part of that is I tell them, at Tusculum, we have greater liberty than most
Ironically.
universities allow themselves.
Yes.
So at whatever university you came from, you were able to talk about history and science and politics,
Mm-hmm.
but probably not your faith. And they would almost always agree.
Sure, of course.
But here we can talk about history, science, and politics,
Sure.
and our faith. And if you
Yeah.
want to pray with a student, you can pray with a student. We have greater liberty.
Yes.
Now, it used to be that Christian universities often weren't the place for greater liberty,
Right.
but they actually, I think, are the havens for greater liberty now.
Yes, I'm heartened to hear that because I think that's truer than people realize.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a I don't know what the right word is, but there's a safety in being able to talk about and assess everything
Mm-hmm.
if you're explicit about the things to which you hold.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sense in which naming it in a confessional sense, whether it's a Christian confessionalism or secular confessionalism, there's a sense in which naming it makes clear the comparisons involved.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not naming it, which I don't think secular universities, for example, are,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really believe in secular sacred divide, period, but
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of the conversation, yeah, I think that there's actually much more freedom for that
Mhm.
learning
Right.
in a more of a Judeo-Christian higher education setting
Mhm.
than people realize.
It's also going to be easier to ask a question, and a tough question about your faith.
Absolutely.
Whereas there's some things you can't even question, okay,
Right.
without being characterized or
Yes.
caricatured for even asking the question.
Mm.
Then I guess one last thing
Yeah, that's good.
to say about, I think, higher education, I'm probably not going to make some people not happy about this. And part of this is informed by my biblical view of things.
Mhm.
I think in the United States broadly and in a lot of higher education, I think we're getting some things backwards.
Hmm.
I think increasingly we begin with all the things that separate us and distinguish us. I am a male.
Right.
I am white. I am this. I
Yes.
am that. I am, okay. And we begin with all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think we need to begin with unity. So at Tusculum, we very much have taken the view of, look, we are pioneers. It's our mascot, we are pioneers.
Yes.
Now, we are pioneers. Some are white, some are black, some are international, some are this, some are Presbyterian, some are Baptist, some are this, some are Muslim, but we're pioneers.
Yes.
Begin with that unity, and then I think that actually helps us to appreciate and to value the diversity.
Yeah.
I think when you begin with diversity, you're not likely to end up with unity.
Agreed.
But I think when you begin with unity,
Mm-hmm.
you can embrace the diversity that's a part of that unity. And Paul just made it such a great example that seems to be beyond a lot of people right now.
Absolutely.
So I think in higher education, it's easy to be siloed,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's just so much fragmentation
Oh, absolutely.
that's so identity-driven.
Uh-huh.
And yet, I think thousands of years ago, neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, but we're
Slave
one
nor
in
free.
Christ.
That's right. Yeah.
So those are some things I see changing.
Yeah. That's good. It's good stuff. I don't disagree with any of that. Yeah. It's good stuff. So we always like to end with a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
What is God teaching you lately?
Mm-hmm.
And what are you excited or encouraged about?
So let me begin with one of the things I'm excited and encouraged about. So this past year, we started asking churches to adopt teams. And we had every athletic team adopted by church. Some churches adopted more than one.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the midst of COVID, which very much hindered it, and but I think this next year we're going to have, it'll be an even better program. But a couple of examples. So we had First Baptist
Mm-hmm.
adopted the football team.
Yeah.
So the entire football team fed them afterwards. But in that worship service, 8 football players accepted Christ.
Mm.
Okay. We have another church that adopted our track team. Okay. Well, just 2 weeks ago, one of the track members accepted Christ.
Cool. Yeah.
Just, phenomenal. I mean, talk about exciting that we have churches and community adopting our teams, adopting our students, and as a result, they are accepting Christ. And now we're like, okay, now you've accepted Christ. You're a disciple. Now let's.
Yeah.
That's
a big deal because that town gown stuff matters.
Yes.
And there's a rootedness to Greene County with lots of folks in those churches who've been around for a long time and will do what they need to ensure that this community continues to thrive. Yeah. And so bringing that together is good. That's big. That's good. Cool. So what's God teaching you lately?
So certainly a lot of things. One, still trying to...
that the 1689 Reformed Calvinists, Second London Baptists, Spurgeonites were correct? Is that what he's been? I'm just kidding.
So still teaching me, just discovering his word every day.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Still teaching me that, with the tornado, that was bigger than any of us. Just, very briefly, just to kind of set it in context. But it still applies now. I'm still learning it. Because there are lessons that you learn intellectually, but that you continue to learn emotionally, and you continue needing to reinforce that.
Yeah.
So kind of with the tornado, we had the 49 buildings damaged. We had just built a new chapel. All the stained glass windows were busted out. But in that chapel, on the pulpit, the Bible was open to Psalm 46. Shards of glass on it, water damage on it, but open there to Psalm 46. Could have been opened anywhere, but boy, I'm glad it was open to Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in times of trouble.
Yeah.
And the next verses are this poetic description of the storm with raging waters. And so for us, it was this incredible encouragement that in the midst of the storm, in fact, in the midst of the storm that's just described, it later then says, "Be still and know that I am God." So, I'm really ready for this COVID storm to entirely blow over, and it just won't go away. Okay, which in some ways is I found more challenging than the tornado.
Yeah,
because the worst day of the tornado was the day of the tornado, and the next day was a little bit better, and the next day was a little bit better, and the next day was a little bit better.
Yes.
This pandemic, I can't say that.
And it was tangible. They're buildings.
Yes.
You can do
and I can
things
see
to
the
rebuild.
progress.
Right.
But is there going to be another surge? Is there going to be another variant? Is there going to be... So, nevertheless, still learning, and sometimes having to remind myself, whether you got financial challenges, enrollment challenges, COVID challenges, God is my refuge and strength and ever-present help in times of trouble. Because legitimately, we would have people then say, look, we can't rebuild in time to start the semester. And we would say, you're right, it's impossible. But God's our refuge and strength and ever-present help in times of trouble. So I'm still learning that lesson.
Yeah, good stuff. Indeed. So am I. Despite the fact that, half of our congregation is brand new in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And you alluded to some of this earlier on. People are a little more reticent. There's a little more circling of the wagons, a little more hesitant to commit to anything. A little more militantly holding on to their margins in all the ways we might define that. Despite the fact that we are not quite up to 100% of our attendance that we were pre-COVID. And these good things are happening. God is still being faithful. People's lives are being changed. Folks from the football team, the track team, our versions of that are happening here. And God is still faithful regardless of the storm around us.
So one just last little thing. I remember after the tornado, got a call, being the provost of the complaint department. Call was directed to me. And it was a person representing an atheist group. And they called, and they didn't call to volunteer, didn't call to donate, just called to mock.
Okay.
So you still believe in a God that allow you to experience a storm and a tornado?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I was kind of irked. Like, really?
Yeah.
I'm dealing with all this. We have students injured, still in the hospital, and you're calling to mock. Really?
If I gave you a smidge of what I'm dealing with right now.
But then, pretty quickly that anger turned to pity.
Yeah.
And I told him, well, actually, we believed that God was our refuge and strength. Now we know he's our refuge and strength. I said, so we have experienced his presence, his provision more tangibly in the midst of the storm.
Yeah.
And I hope one day you can experience the presence even if it comes in the midst of a storm.
Absolutely. It's gold. Thanks for meeting with us.
Thank you.
Coffee Convo.
All right.
Yes, indeed. Join us next time.
All right, thank you.